Anyway, the article then goes on to talk about the age-old debate of, can women become pastors? The Southern Baptist Convention says that only men may serve as pastors, and a wife is to submit herself graciously to her husband. Oof. And at its annual meeting this summer, delegates voted to condemn the use of in vitro fertilization. God, this constant obsession over what people are allowed to do with their bodies is so painful to witness. And that's just witnessing. Forget actually living through this. Some churches have cracked down in recent years on practices like women speaking from the pulpit, and the theology of complementarianism, which asserts that men and women have separate roles in marriage and church leadership, is resurgent. Young women, it seems, are moving past the debates and out the church doors. About 2/3 of women ages 18 to 29 say that most churches and religious congregations do not treat men and women equally. That was definitely my experience as a serial church hopper.
Hi, I'm Stacey McLaren.
I'm John Beeson.
And this is God in the Gray, a place where real people who work at a real place in Tucson, Arizona, New Life Bible Fellowship, come together and we discuss spirituality, religion, culture, and all of the gray areas that we find God. We consider this a conversation, and we want to invite you in to have a seat at the table with us. So today we're going to talk, we're going to have a conversation back and forth about this great video that came out. This D'Angelo is on YouTube, and he released a video about. There was an article that came out several months ago, about how in Gen Z, many, many women are leaving the church. And it is concerning. I mean, it was actually shocking to read that article. And so he had some great points. He had some points that we would push back on. And you kind of came and said, let's talk about this week. And so, we want to take a look at this video and kind of walk through different points and discuss our varying views. I'm excited. Are you excited?
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
If I had to sum up today's entire video in a single word, it would be oblivious. Christianity. Am I right? I just saw this article from the New York Times about how, for the first time ever, more young men are religious than young women. And I found it hilarious how the religious leaders in the article seemed oblivious to why this could possibly be happening. Why, oh why, would someone not connect to this message that we're preaching? And it's doubly funny when a single Google search will instantly reveal a bunch of people, even within the Christian community, who are pointing out that this is pretty obvious why a lot of young women would not feel comfortable in church. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about, not only because of the cognitive dissonance, but because it's a fun chance to share some rare D'Angelo lore. I've never publicly said this before on the internet, but I have actually technically spent more of my life as a Christian, like a certified Jesus freak, than not. Now I'm just a certified freak, no Jesus required, but he's still invited if he wants to. I mean, I don't discriminate.
So interesting start. This article comes out and says that Gen Z women are really moving away from the church, and interesting response, obviously from D'Angelo. I think it's an understandable response to look at the Christian community and say, you guys are surprised by this? Of course, women are being pushed away, and there's layers of reasons for that. I think we're all going to look at it, and it's a little bit of a Rorschach inkblot test. You're going to see in those numbers kind of what you see. I hope that in our conversation with D'Angelo, we can kind of maybe try to bring some level of objectivity to that. I think that, at the end of the day, there is some reality that there's some obliviousness in the church, and that the church, it's interesting. This is kind of a side tangent. I've recently been, over the last couple of years, been going on a deep dive trying to find a good book on sex for Christian premaritals. We give a book to every couple who walks through our pre-marriage counseling on sexuality. And it's interesting. You go back and you realize some of the stuff just does not age well. There is an obliviousness, to use D'Angelo's terms, of just categories that are just patently unhelpful, and I would actually argue unbiblical, but certainly out of step in a significant way with today's culture. Now, as Christians, we don't change because it's out of step. But sometimes a change in a cultural moment can take a culture that's acquiescing to the type of language you're speaking as Christians, and all of a sudden illuminate it, and you have to ask that question, wait a second, is this biblical? And I don't think it's unfair for a critic to come in and say, hey, you guys have been using this language. I grew up in a culture which spoke of women, which spoke of a relationship between men and women in a way that really diminished women. And you all are oblivious if you think that that has not had an effect. So I just want to agree to start here that there's going to be disagreements down the road, but I actually think that that's a fair starting point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to even speak into that too, I had a moment where I was listening to this and I thought, is the church oblivious? And I think coming from my perspective is, well, I see things through my lens, right? So I am not oblivious to this. And I would think that there are many women who wouldn't be oblivious to this too. And so I just, again, seeing that through my filter, I just automatically assume that everybody's going to realize that this makes perfect sense, that women are walking away.
Yeah.
So. All right, so let's watch our next clip.
Again, I find marveling at its strangeness to be hilarious. Like, whoa, this is so weird. And it's funny because the main poll that they're using with the 5,000 people, that was actually posted on Reddit, on the Christianity subreddit a few months ago. And even the top comments are like, duh. I feel that churches in general could do more to reassure young women of their value as part of God's family. I won't presume to speak for women, but I have seen situations where young women are somewhat neglected or devalued. I'll speak for young women. They're treated like absolute garbage in so many churches. I was just a little boy sitting through lectures about shaming women for how they're dressing, singling out lesbians for some reason as some indication of how the world is going to hell, mocking them for the music they're listening to, implying basically that they're so stupid. The world is so worldly, it's going to corrupt them because women can't think for themselves. They can't possibly listen to Beyonce and still identify as a Christian, right? And it basically boiled down to the same issue that's at the heart of this whole discussion. Women are less traditional now. They're less traditional, and that's bad, and we hate it. Hence them being somewhat neglected or devalued if they're not married. I like the top reply saying churches in general could do more to reassure congregants of a woman's value. We aren't often walking around devaluing ourselves in a vacuum. The narrative about the value and roles of women in society needs to change. And so yeah, when the church tends to be literally the hub world of the root issue that is underpinning all of these political problems for women, it's just so very obvious what's going on here.
He obviously goes hard in the paint about women being treated like garbage. That feels sticky to me, even though I can say, yeah, that's right. So much has been put on women. Blame. Like if you look at purity culture, let's just take a quick look at that. And even now it's kind of making a comeback of women are responsible for a man's lust. If you're wearing anything too tight, it's your fault. If you're wearing anything low cut, if you're wearing anything in a certain area of church that anyone could see as inappropriate, it's your fault if a man stumbles.
In certain circles.
In certain circles, yes.
Yeah.
Not, and I do like let's discuss that. It's not every church, and there is a high number of churches that still hold to this principle of women should be modest and women should hold their tongue and women should be submissive, and not in a good co-submissive way, a more like a you do what you're told when you're told to do it the way I tell you to do it. So I
think one of the things that's interesting is, and I don't even know if it's helpful for us to figure out what percentage is on either side of that, right? Mm-hmm. Like which percentage of churches are valuing women well, which percentage are devaluing them, blaming them, etc. But I will say, no matter what side you're on, especially in our social media saturated age with, lots of people with microphones in front of them, mm-hmm. It's not surprising that no matter where you are, you're going to hear those voices.
Yeah.
And certainly if you're on the fence or even sort of outside the church, those voices are just going to drive you away.
Yeah. Well, I think it speaks to even so in social media trend a month or so ago was asking your daughters, would you rather be stuck alone in a forest with a bear or a man? High percentage of the answers were a bear. Like that speaks to something, especially as we watch abuse cases go up in churches. And I would even say that for the churches who are building up women and placing high value on women's voices, there can still be space for reflection and for acknowledgement of we need to continue to look inside our own doors of where are we falling short in valuing women, in lifting them up, in creating co-submissive relationships and teaching men and women how that works. I appreciate the comment that we don't devalue ourselves in a vacuum. We devalue ourselves when so many other people keep speaking unworthiness to us. And I think that's in church and outside of church. So I think in the church, we can always do more to improve that. Have I felt like garbage? Absolutely. Do I now? No. But I know my worth and I know my value, and I can speak to someone who's speaking down to that value. And rightfully so. If we're Christians inside the church, male or female, we should be able to speak truth to someone and go, no, that is not true. I am valued in the eyes of Christ. My voice matters, whether you like it or not.
Can I, let me tweak something just a little bit about that comment that was, that D'Angelo quoted there. And then I want to ask you a question. So I'd actually say that we do devalue ourselves in a vacuum, biblically speaking. So biblical anthropology says that because of our sin nature, like shame sticks to us from a young age. And so I think we devalue ourselves already, even in a vacuum. But oh my goodness, you add any bit of noise into that vacuum that amplifies the shame voice in every one of our hearts, and massive. So it's not even like a disagreement. Ultimately, I'm just kind of tweaking it in terms of like the theological clarification there. But let me turn and ask you, Stacy. So what are the ways in which you as a woman can walk into a room, walk into a church, and your antenna go up as to this is a place I'm going to be valued, or antenna go up, this is a place I'm not going to be valued?
Ooh. So I think I might have a difficult time with that in a first walking through the door the first time. But because I've experienced both, I'm going to listen to the message first for coming from the pulpit. And usually in a church who's not going to value women, you're going to hear that in the sermon, right? You're going to see that in the way the women in the congregation hold themselves or act. Or so like here at New Life, I could walk down the hallway on any given Sunday, and in almost every class, there is a dad, like a male and a female working in there. That doesn't happen in churches that don't esteem women in that role. That's a woman's job, and therefore women will do the childcare. I'm going to look at their staff. I'm going to see what the diversity is on their staff as far as gender goes. So our staff is very heavy on the female side, and I appreciate that. There is value in our voices. The questions are asked. Women are sought after to ask their thoughts and opinions. And I think that's a key factor. But those two, the message is going to come from the sermon, unspoken and spoken. And then you can watch just like body language and the way women hold themselves as to whether or not they're lifted up or are they suppressed.
It's interesting, the Me Too movement, and then the Church Too movement. It's interesting how it infected all branches of the political spectrum. And so I think, this is just me speaking here. I actually don't know if there's a correlation between where I think you can land at a lot of different places in terms of what you understand biblically, the Bible to be saying about, okay, how does this male-female thing work in terms of their relationship? There's a lot of different ways to understand that. That's for another video. We'll unpack that. That'll be fun. But, the Me Too movement started in Hollywood, right? Like the center of progressive ideology, right? Where women were demeaned. And I've seen that happen in the church world. In progressive churches, women who might have a seat at the table, but not a voice at the table. Conversely, of course, then you go far right to the, to scandal in the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention, far conservative circles, where also the very same silencing. So I think that it really does. It's not just checking a box and finding a church that has a certain type of theology that you think will protect you from that. It's actually saying, hey, what are my convictions on that biblically? I want to seek that out. And then trusting not just that box to protect you, but actually who are the people? What's the culture here? I think that's what you're getting at. I love that. So anything final before we go to the next clip?
Ask questions. I think when you start to ask questions, the response back is going to tell you a whole lot. And not even necessarily in the answer, but just how the attitude is towards you asking a question, right? You want to have someone that's going to step in even more curiously and like, tell me more, and ask questions back, that there's that dialogue. If someone shuts you down as soon as you ask that question, Yeah.
That's good. All right. So D'Angelo's going to get into some of the specifics here of what he thinks are the cause of some of this lostness. So we're going to navigate those piece by piece. So here's the next one.
I keep using the word funny throughout this video, but you might notice by now I don't actually mean humorous. Anyway, the article then goes on to talk about the age-old debate of, can women become pastors? The Southern Baptist Convention says that only men may serve as pastors. Any wife is to submit herself graciously to her husband. Oof. And at its annual meeting this summer, delegates voted to condemn the use of in vitro fertilization. God, this constant obsession over what people are allowed to do with their bodies is so painful to witness. And that's just witnessing. Forget actually living through this. Some churches have cracked down in recent years on practices like women speaking from the pulpit, and the theology of complementarianism, which asserts that men and women have separate roles in marriage and church leadership, is resurgent. Young women, it seems, are moving past the debates and out the church doors. About 2/3 of women ages 18 to 29 say that most churches and religious congregations do not treat men and women equally. That was definitely my experience as a serial church hopper.
So interesting. He kind of sandwiched a couple different things there, talking about the role of men and women in the church, and then also this issue of in vitro fertilization. Also tucked in there, of course, are questions about life and kind of the autonomy of one's body. Let me kind of deal with the second one first, and then come back to kind of the larger issue of male-female issues. And I'll say both of them are connected in this, and we're going to get more into this as this goes along, which is just to say, like, there are realities in which Christianity, frankly, any religion, any worldview is going to press us if that worldview is if we believe that to be authoritative over us. And I recognize, so D'Angelo is, he's a free agent. He talks about that quite freely. Like he doesn't ascribe to anything, wouldn't, necessarily call himself an atheist. And so I get that, like as someone who's a free agent, who's choosing kind of what feels best about any worldview, when you come across something like that, you're going to be like, no, like I'm out, right? Like anyone who's going to deal with my body, I'm out. And I just recognize that there's going to be a pinch point here, because if as Christians we believe the Bible is God's word, and then my response is to trust God's word and respond to it, like we're going to have to hold, there's a different level at which we hold these truths, right? There's things that are just crystal clear in the Bible, and there's other things that are less clear, but in all of those things, the deciding factor can't be what am I most comfortable with. I'll come back to that just in a second. And so even just fundamentally on the question of the authority of Scripture has over my autonomy or not, my body or not, there's just going to be a different perspective as a Christian to say, and I'm not even saying I necessarily agree with where the Southern Baptist Convention landed on in vitro fertilization. It's a whole other question. But I would just say this, that ultimately that question is not decided by what gives me the most freedom and what makes me feel best. It's in what way am I honoring my Creator the best? So let me flip to the second question, and I'll talk less on this. I want you to talk more, which is this. Like, yes, like when we come to the Bible, there's a lot of different interpretations around what the Bible has to say about the relationship between male and female, about men and women, and what are the boundaries in that. I promise you, we'll do a whole video on that. That's worth a whole video. I will say this. For evangelicals, kind of depending, no matter where you are on that, you're going to ultimately say that the purposes of the Bible's clear on this point, the purposes of any differences there are between men and women is ultimately to reflect a relationship that we have with Jesus Christ. And I totally get, if you're not a Christian, you're like, well, that's just nonsense. And I get that. I will say this, there's an invitation into something more mysterious and something more powerful and something beyond us that is, I think, ultimately actually compelling. That we don't get to create those categories, that God created those categories with a purpose. And that would be my invitation to D'Angelo and others who are kind of engaging that question and are just like repelled, like why in the world would these crazy Christians keep holding to this thing that, that's just ancient history. And I get that. There's a sense, and there's a way in which I totally think that that's like misunderstood and misused and misapplied and applied poorly in the church. I get all of that. But there is an ultimate sense in which we have to grapple with, do we get to self-determine these realities of gender and male and female and how they relate to each other? Or do I submit to something bigger than me in that?
Yeah. It's a lot there. I do want to just point out, like, even in the article, it says that complementarianism is making a resurgence. I would say it never went away. I would say in some circles, it's not complementarianism as I would think about it. It is more like toxic masculinity that's being masked behind the label of complementarianism. It's like they took complementarianism and gave it steroids and it just blew up. That doesn't mean that within the bounds and within that definition that's abuse easily happens there. I will say that, speaking to that, we have to trust in an authority, right? So here, I trust in the authority that is over me. We have differences on like, I do believe that women can be pastors. I don't know, I don't yet believe, and I don't think that I will ever believe that a woman should be a lead pastor. I think that is a role that is specifically given to Amanda Shepherd. But that doesn't mean that I open the door for my voice to be taken away, for my spiritual giftings to be taken away. And do I believe that God can give any gift he wants to any person he wants to, male or female? Absolutely. And we are not ones that should be standing in the way and gatekeeping those gifts. But I think that there is a call to Christians. It's a call to men and women who would believe like I do. but also who would be, like hardline complementarian, like let's walk open-handedly with this. Because ultimately, in the end, it is our Creator who's going to say, yeah, you guys might have gotten that wrong, or nope, that was spot on. And so I think if we walk into this with open hands, we enter a conversation much better than if we just hold on to our opinions. I can hold on to my belief that I do believe that women can be pastors. I believe that there's open space in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And also walk under the authority that has been placed in this church and be okay with that. Because I know that God has given me gifts and talents that he will allow me to walk in, either here or in parachurch or in ministry. So
I'll just share, I think one of the things that I really resonate with what D'Angelo is saying here is that, let me pull back the curtain. There is a reality that in a culture that's really pushed, a progressive woke culture, that there has been a reaction, especially among young men who feel homeless and lost and blamed and trying to find their footing, right? And that there have been those places, people. I'll speak even specifically the Albert Tates of the world, which I think have really become kind of refuges for that kind of a lost young man. That unfortunately, and I don't say this, I think this is a sad reality, but some churches are leveraging that, right? And so they're becoming springboards for that, a really unhealthy place, unhealthy response. And in that context are really just, I think, becoming unbiblical, frankly, in the way in which they're interpreting the text. They are becoming, it's like an anti-culture. It's like, here's the woke progressives, and so we're just going to become everything they're not. And man, that's not how biblical culture is built. That's not how healthy culture is built. And so I would just warn those churches out there who are built on what they're against more than on what they're for, to say, hold on, can you go back to the basics? Can you go back to Scripture and actually ask the question, what are God's good purposes? What's the way Christ treats women? You look at the women who are disciples, core disciples. Women are the eyewitnesses of the resurrection. Women fund Paul's ministry, are key in Paul's ministry. Like, whatever you want to say about the specific roles, they are valued, they are honored in a way that's radical, frankly, in the culture that they're in. Yeah. And so that's the question that I would bring to kind of that cultural response that I think can really turn toxic in a way. And I get D'Angelo's response. I get others' response. I get young women saying, whoa, if that's what the church is, if the church is really just about what they're, a response against this, I don't want any part of that. Yeah. It's understandable.
Because then what they're really coming against is who I am, the person that I was made to be, the person that they were made to be. So
yeah.
So our next part where he's going to jump into is going to be kind of looking at that LGBTQ process and how the church has stepped into that and why some women have been leaving just because of that as well. So
I can't go to a place of worship and know that the person next to me thinks that gay people are going to burn in hell. I still believe in God and Jesus and all that. I just struggle to call myself a Christian.
Okay, so let's talk about that. The church and LGBTQIA+ has not been, it's been an oil and water combination, right? I think in the name of Jesus Christ, the church, by and large, has done more damage to LGBTQ than it has done good. And so I get that commenter. I find it hard to sit in a place where I know that the person next to me believes that a gay person should burn in hell forever. I agree. It's hard for me to push and pull here. I struggle. I believe that the biblical narrative for marriage is between a man and a woman. I hold firm to that. And I love people who are gay and queer and bi and trans. And I want them to know Jesus. And I want them to experience the Jesus that I know, the Jesus of grace and mercy and love and conviction. Like, my sin is no different than anybody else's, right? And I want those who have such hatred and vitriol towards the LGBTQ community to sit all the way down and learn that the Christ that they're preaching is not going to convert anyone. That is my passion. I want to enter into a relationship with people. I don't want the first thing that I say to somebody to be like, oh, well, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're going to, burn in hell forever. That's not an opener. But a relationship to be developed with someone so that they can experience Christ where they're at, walking through the things that they're walking through, with someone who actually authentically loves them no matter what. That's Jesus. And I feel like the church should be doing more of that. And I know many churches do, and not just progressive churches. I would say that even churches that hold to very traditional values, especially in marriage and relationships, love their queer neighbors. How do we do better at that? Well, I would ask, do you see it differently? How do we do better? How do we invite, if we're going to love our neighbors, there's no stipulation of who that neighbor is, right?
Yeah.
It's everybody.
It's interesting. One of the biggest challenges, so my wife's a counselor, and sometimes we do counseling together. And one of the biggest challenges with counseling a couple in the room is sometimes you're like, I want you to put on earmuffs right now. Like, I'm going to tell you something that's going to be, I don't want to be weaponized against you. And then I want to tell the other person something I don't want to be weaponized against you. Right. And this is like a both and, not an either or. Mm-hmm. Our culture is constantly either oring us. It's a both and. And so to the church, I just totally want to say that to the church. To my brothers and sisters in a kind of an evangelical context in which we submit to the authority of Scripture. We think that the Bible's story speaks of God's purposes for marriage to be between a man and a woman, for life, for that to reflect the love of Christ to the church. That's where we are. And I would say, but remember the words of Christ, right? Like, Christ came for sinners, of which I'm the foremost, right? Like, Christ even comes, like who are you here for? It's like, I'm not here for you. I came for the lost sheep, mm-hmm. right? Now, of course, he's not saying he's not there for the religious or the Pharisees. He's saying, if you don't think you need him, he didn't come for you. Mm. If you do not first acknowledge your deep need of Christ, and if you do not see in yourself, in your brother or your sister or your neighbor, hey, that's me. I'm there, maybe with a different issue, but I am there. I too am a sinner saved by grace, or in need of grace if they're not yet rescued, right? And so that's to the church, and then to the world, to those who aren't yet in Christ, who haven't trusted in Christ, or who are on that side where you look at the church, you're like, you guys are crazy. Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is yesterday's news that we're affirming. How are you not affirming? I would just invite you in this way. What if you're wrong? What if there's truth beyond you, and actually the best place for you is to be in places in which you're not merely affirmed in what you already believe? And I think that's true for all of us, right? Mm-hmm. It's why we're engaging with this video, right? Like, we want to take honestly and seriously those with whom we disagree. And I would say, I get this call, this email a number of times, in any given year. Hey, is your church affirming? The question is, does your church fit through my preconceived theological, philosophical, political lens? And then I'm willing to go to your church. And I would just say, what if that's not the best place for you? What if actually the best place for you is to encounter a holy God who's wholly other, who doesn't think like us, and who calls us to a different way? And so I think both of those things remain. And I wholly understand why the world looks at the church, the evangelical church, the conservative church, and says, you guys are just so unwelcoming. And I think part of it's true. And I think part of it is a demand to submit to your worldview that we just can't do. Not because we're stubborn or unloving, but because we have a different authority.
Yeah.
So we get to switch from that light topic to the topic of hell. D'Angelo's going to dive into wrestling with the topic of hell.
I really think the concept of hell is like Christianity's biggest L, if I'm being honest. And I feel like I'm allowed to say that. You know, having dealt with my own religious trauma, I feel qualified to say just the concept of hell needs to go. Keep it if you want, but don't be surprised that this message is not resonating with people. If you're trying to get people on their side, telling them that they're going to burn for all eternity is obviously not smart in the first place, and really to me just makes it seem more like you want to tell people that they're going to burn for all eternity and you're better than them because you accepted Jesus into your heart, because you really can't believe that you're actually helping someone when you tell them that, right? So at the very least, the idea of telling people who are not Christians that they're going to burn in hell needs to stop. And you know what? On the off chance that you're right, I don't care. I lived through the first Trump administration. I'm currently getting through this election cycle. I've watched the very same freedoms that were finally afforded to people get overturned for no reason. I've watched people excuse the actual literal death of people because they were just so racist. They have to make up a reason for why people deserve to die. We've got genocide, poverty, all these horrible things that are happening right now. Maybe worry about the hell that we're already in. Maybe let's work on that first, and then I'll start to care about whether or not I'm going to go to hell part 2 afterward.
So, wow. Interesting response. And I totally get that. I'll just begin here. I'll be pretty blunt. The character in the Bible who speaks the most about hell and it's not close is Jesus Christ. And so I'd suggest that, that for those who struggle with Christians speaking about hell, your challenge is Jesus Christ. And I know for many of you, you honor, you respect even Jesus Christ. And so I would actually encourage you, listen to Jesus speak about hell. Why would it be that Jesus speaks as much as he does about hell? Now, I would also actually say, this is a very contrarian perspective. I would actually say maybe D'Angelo, I don't know the context in which you grew up in. It's actually kind of underpreached today. Not many churches are actually talking about hell. I would argue actually to not do so is actually fairly unloving. And the reason is actually what you get at the end of your statement there, which I so appreciate, right? You're speaking to the pain of the world that you live in. Like you are feeling the pain. One of the phrases that Jesus uses to talk about hell is it's where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's this grinding, this like, I can't believe it. The grinding of teeth speaks of deep regret. And the heart of a Christian who brings up hell ought to be, I'm not saying it always is the case. It ought to be of the profound love and care for you. And so just as, if you're about to, you're the kid who's about to get on his bike and ride down a hill when you haven't even learned how to ride the bike yet, and crash into the street. Your mom loves you enough to say, no, honey, we're gonna learn how to ride that bike in the driveway first. So it is with the Christian in hell, with Jesus in hell. We feel that pain with you. We feel that suffering. And if it's true that ultimately there's a decision for every single one of us in which we choose to be with God for eternity, or we choose to reject God for eternity and be without him, and that rejection of God is torment and disappointment and darkness and bleakness and hopelessness and lovelessness, as we can we've only ever experienced a droplet of that in this world, then I think the most loving thing for us to do is to say, no. We love you too much not to speak of this reality, that the decisions that we make in this world are decisions that have ultimate consequences. I believe Jesus. I understand if you don't, but I just would invite you to grapple with him. Not so much. It's not a Christian invention. It's a Jesus invention.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I will say that I don't ever want to sit in another sermon where the hellfire and brimstone services are preached. Like, to me, that was like I agree with him on that aspect. At the same time,
Insofar as like it's manipulative, you mean?
like it's manipulative. It scared me to death as a kid. Like, and so I wasn't coming to God as a loving God.
Mm-hmm.
I was coming to God as a tyrant.
Yeah.
Right. And I want people that I am in relationship with who don't know Jesus yet to experience a God of love and of grace and of mercy and of getting in there with us and being with us in the hard stuff, being with us in all the things that he mentioned. Like, God is there. I want them to experience that God, to experience that Christ who said, enough is enough. I'm going to choose to go and die for this. So that when they do realize that an eternity without him, it is hell. And they don't want that. That's what I want them to experience of Christ and of God, not a tyrant view. So the next part we're going to talk about.
Yeah, the next part, D'Angelo really goes into a little bit of his own story and just reflecting on kind of, it was not like necessarily like a theological reason that he left the church. It just was busyness.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually important for us to wrestle with as well.
I didn't break from Christianity because I don't know, I came to some amazing internal realization. My family just got really busy. We could not go to church every single week. We could not be as involved in the church as we were. And then I went to college and it was just over. Like, that was the end of it for me. Being surrounded by so many people outside of the church who had different beliefs, sitting through classes and learning about other religions. Oof, that one helped a lot. I sure do wish Christianity was more open to talking about other religions, but instead they were presented as, no, this is bad and magic and evil and you will vanish if you so much as read about it. I read about it and I was like, oh wow, this is pretty dope as well. And oh wow, this other religion is cool too. And wow, it's crazy how these same problems are persisting throughout multiple disconnected religions. But also, so are these same messages of love and acceptance. It's almost like religion is just being used to structuralize human emotion. And to me, personally, the particular religion doesn't really matter at all. Maybe I should just try to be a good person. Maybe God could exist or not exist and it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't really have a bearing on me trying to be a good person. I don't know, but that's just me and my Christian journey.
I have a lot of thoughts. The one thing that comes to mind is when he says, I wish Christianity would just be more open to other religions. There's a part of me that says, yeah, you're right. Like, we should probably talk about other religions, not necessarily to say they're right or wrong, but like to process through what do other religions believe. And that attitude of, oh, we can't talk about that because poof, you're going to vanish, kind of goes back to a comment that he made talking about the women of that. Does the church, are we treating our people as if they're not smart enough to figure out this, to navigate this? The world is too dangerous for you, therefore we can't talk about this, so we just won't. So those are kind of the thoughts that came to my head first.
Yeah. Recently we were just... We're navigating a sermon series, just finishing a sermon series in Ecclesiastes. And I would hope that this would mark my own preaching. I just a couple weeks ago kind of reflected on the problem of suffering and how do different worldviews process that? How do different religions process that? What's Christianity's response? How are those different? And I would suggest, I think contrary to what D'Angelo is basically saying there, is that there are significant differences. That actually that path to goodness is wrought in very different ways, whether through a Buddhist pathway or a Hindu pathway or a Muslim pathway or a Christian pathway or whatever it is. And actually it's dishonoring to those religions to just flatten them, you know? It's a little bit like the patronizing, I don't see any skin color, right? Like that's actually not honoring to the person, to their ethnicity, to their background. And so it is with religions. Yeah, Christians ought to honor those and ought to navigate those and speak seriously of those. That's partly why we're doing this. It's also, I think, ultimately a fundamental difference of opinion that we have in terms of how you become good. And Christianity says this audacious thing, which is that we ultimately can never become good enough on our own, that there's a loss in every one of us, and that only Christ himself was good. But he loved us so much that he gave his life for us so that he could take on our bad, on our sin, that we could become his good, his righteousness, right? And that's a profound gift of God. And actually, as Christians, we want to take seriously, if that truly is what happened, it's honoring to God to take that seriously and not then try to disconnect that and do good on our own, right? If the God of the universe offered that gift to us, it's not loving to say, no thanks for the gift, I'm going to try to earn this on my own, right? I will also say one other thing, which is I think so true about so many people's religious journeys, is just the factor of busyness. Like D'Angelo's like I know that ultimately sort of that philosophy of religions piece was important for him, but it was first and foremost kind of just the busyness of life that just pulled them away. And I would just urge you, kind of wherever you are in your journey, to ask the question, what is of ultimate value to you? And if that question of becoming a good person is of ultimate value, maybe D'Angelo's right, and maybe that's a path that we can all have on our own. You know, that's potentially right. But I would actually say that you owe it to yourself to take seriously and consider seriously the different pathways to that, including the Christian pathway to that. Very different answers to that question all across the board that all deserve our respect. Because I agree, D'Angelo, God has intended for us, you know, the way that Paul talks about this in Ephesians 10 is for good works, for good purposes. We're not part of a playthings on his, on his table. He has purposed us for good works. And if that's the case, if we're made for good, then we owe it ourselves. And as a Christian, I would say we owe our Creator that pursuit of that in a serious way.
So good. So good. This has been so much fun. D'Angelo, if you see this, if you listen to this, we so appreciate your response to this article. It was great. It was very insightful. Thank you for being honest and authentic. And we hope that you will be engaging with us, that maybe you would, send us a message just to say, hey. Again, if you are listening to this, we want to encourage you to check out this full video of D'Angelo's as well, but also to like and subscribe and share down below. And that way you won't miss any episodes of God in the Gray in the future. Thank you for watching.